Welcome to another F1 Fantasy video. It's been a long time, almost a month, and we are going into Spa, one of my favorite tracks. We had Hungary last time out. I'm going to be recapping on that performance in Raceweek 13 before delving into my team selection and what I think the best builds for Belgium are. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Should we go for Lewis Hamilton, who is on a double race and qualifying streak? It is definitely a very enticing option, and we've got a lot of choices in this upcoming deadline, so let's just get straight into it. Let's get this video to over 50 likes, it'd be much appreciated. And this is my third team, and it was the lowest performing squad that I have at my disposal. 128 points, and it's got the least points in general. I had Verstappen in there, and he went from 10th to 1st. It was an incredible performance, and it's one of his best victories to date in Formula 1. Ferrari was my constructor though, and as you can tell, Red Bull was definitely the preferred choice. And Ferrari's strategies, the DNFs, all these different issues just keep on piling up every single week. So even though they have the fastest car, they just aren't able to get the best out of their package due to those factors, and I think there's definitely much more than meets the eye as well. Leclerc was my turbo driver, and that ultimately let me down. I'm not sure what Ferrari were thinking. You know, he was definitely poised for a top 2 finish, but their decision making just ended up costing him a place in the top 4 altogether, and he just had a dreadful end to the first half of the season. So very poor for him. Alonso, you know, this is the thing, so much has happened in this kind of month between the last F1 Fantasy video and now. Fernando Alonso is actually leaving Alpine and going to Aston Martin. Then you have Sebastian Vettel retiring from Formula 1. You've got Daniel Ricciardo leaving McLaren, all the kind of drama of Oscar Piastri. There's so much to cover there. That could, you know, form another video in itself. But Fernando Alonso, what is going to happen with him now? You know, he's been very impressive this season, hasn't got the points he deserves, but will Alpine now just favour Ocon and just focus on him instead of Alonso, who has no long-term future, despite him being a legend for the team and the only driver to win them championships? So let me know what you think of that one as well. It's definitely very interesting to see all these dynamics of these teams and drivers. Then we have two -1 pointers from Bottas and Magnussen, who both lost race positions. So very disappointing from those two, but the rest was fairly decent. And Verstappen, 55 points. I mean, you can't ask for much more than that, especially with his qualifying. And he had a race streak in the last race, and that also significantly boosted his score and gave him 10 extra points. And that's why there's a genuine argument to go for Lewis Hamilton, who not only has that in his locker, but also the qualifying streak, which could give him 5+ points should he qualify in the top 10. So that was my third team. Let's now move into my second and first teams before moving on to my team selection and the best builds for Spa. Despite being my most successful team, the second squad wasn't as good in this race week, in Raceweek 13, compared to my first one, which is good to hear. And this was kind of my all eggs in the Ferrari basket with the Constructor Ferrari, Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc, and I kind of compensated for that with the turbo driver on Sergio Perez, but it was Carlos Sainz in the end who was my most successful driver. Lando Norris finished in 7th, and he's got a race streak coming up in Spa, and I think he's a great option as a result, but I'd still be a bit concerned because he's a very good qualifier, and if the kind of rainy conditions do happen in Belgium, as they tend to do, then I think Norris could qualify very well and maybe even have a good race. But in general, he does lose quite a lot of positions when he does qualify extremely high up in the grid, so that's something to consider. Magnussen was in there once again, and Sergio Perez was kind of sleeping at the very end. He was a bit unlucky not to finish 4th, but at the very end with the restart, the safety car restart, he should have done much better, and Russell kind of caught him off guard there. But there you go, that was my second team, and now the all-important first one, and I got a nice green arrow to celebrate. Despite turbo driving Charles Leclerc, and that was obviously very frustrating in itself, I had Red Bull as the constructor, and that's what separated this team with the other two squads which had Ferrari in them. I had Lando Norris, who had a decent race. The same goes for Fernando Alonso, and also a very good weekend overall for both of them with good qualifying positions and a decent race finish. Magnussen, of course, he was in every single one of my squads, and he was the big letdown. Carlos Sainz was fairly decent considering, you know, Ferrari's kind of shambolic strategies and all of that good stuff that they keep on producing every single week. And I have gone up to 58,000 in the world. It's not my highest rank so far this season, but I'll still take it, and I think I can push on now into the second half of the campaign. I still haven't used my wild card, although going into race week 14 with this kind of 3 or 4 week break we've just had, it was maybe a good time to use it and build team value, but a lot of factors are outside our control. The kind of the hacker that keeps on influencing these price rises and falls, so you've got to kind of be very alert, and I think most of us were just on holiday and enjoying the scenery around us. Be sure to join the league code, which you can see on the left-hand corner of your screen and also in the description below. And now let me show you all three teams side by side, just so you can get a good idea of the differences between all of them. And then it's the all-important team selection. In fairness, they're all quite similar, but Red Bull versus Ferrari is always going to be a distinguishable factor, and I'm going to continue to do this. Try to have Ferrari in at least one of my builds, but mainly prioritize Red Bull for my first team because they're the best constructor. They might not be the quickest car, but they're still not too far off Ferrari. They've got the straight line speed, that's for sure. It's definitely by far the best in that regard, and they have the best driver on the grid at the moment in Max Verstappen, and they have good strategy. That is very important, and if Ferrari can fine-tune these errors, I think they could be right up there. But then you've also got reliability to contend with as well. But Alonso is in pretty much two of these three teams. You've got Norris in two of these three. I've got Carlos Sainz in two of these three as well. So as you can see, it's kind of a recurring theme here. I've got Verstappen in one of these builds, and despite how well he did in the last race and how consistent he is, it does show you that it's very hard to have a balanced squad when you have someone like Hamilton or Verstappen in your team. But I have to say, it's still possible to do very well in a specific race week. But in general, I do prefer a bit more balance and trying to have one or two Red Bull coverage. And the same goes for Ferrari, although with them, you'd probably be a bit less inclined to do so. And I think one driver is enough. And then you can have the kind of medium priced options like Lando Norris, Fernando Alonso, Esteban Ocon, who I really like. And Bottas has kind of fallen by the wayside, which is a bit of a shame. But maybe Alfa Romeo can make a comeback and have a very strong end to the season. And now let's go into how my third team is looking like and what my plans are for that squad. With my third squad, I have 105.4 million, so I have exactly enough funds to go for something like this. But it does seem a bit weird because I'm getting rid of Verstappen, who is probably the most likely to win the race, and go to Lewis Hamilton. With the double streaks, it is fairly understandable and reasonable, but otherwise, if it wasn't for these streaks, I will go nowhere near Lewis Hamilton, despite his consistency, 5 consecutive podiums, because Verstappen is just much more likely to win these races. I'm also getting rid of Charles Leclerc with a qualifying streak for Sergio Perez, and that also kind of gives you a bit of Red Bull coverage, which I think is imperative because, like I said, they are the best team. But I don't trust Sergio Perez in the wet conditions, so I think I'd be a bit cautious about some of these moves and maybe go with Ferrari as the constructor because it enables me to go for Verstappen or Hamilton as the driver in this build, and then maybe just stick with Charles Leclerc in for Sergio Perez. But that also means I'm not able to afford Ocon and Alonso, so I might need to kind of settle with someone like Valtteri Bottas, who hasn't been doing it recently. And even when he's had some good qualifying performances, he's had some DNFs and reliability issues. Magnussen is also in here, but as always, I'm going to be waiting for the practice sessions before finalising my team. It could be Mick Schumacher in for Magnussen, for example, and I would love to have Norris in this build as well, but I'm going to prioritise him for some of the more important teams, should we say, with my second team, obviously, like I said before, being my highest performing overall, and my first team being the one that mainly counts for the leaderboards and the overall rank. I'm also going for Ferrari in my second build, but just because I've got Ferrari in 2 of my 3 teams overall, that doesn't mean that I think they're a better team to have than Red Bull, because Red Bull have that race streak, and I think they're much more consistent and reliable than Ferrari. So that's just kind of a way of affording Hamilton and Verstappen in the other build. And here, this is kind of my all-in on Ferrari, just in case they have one of those super weekends like they did maybe in Austria, if it wasn't for Carlos Sainz's DNF, or in Bahrain, when they looked absolutely unstoppable in the first race weekend of the season. It seems like such a long time ago now. Sergio Perez is my turbo driver here at the moment, but I would probably change that and still go all in on Ferrari and probably go for Charles Leclerc. But I have to say, Carlos Sainz is the informed driver from those that you see on screen. And apart from Hamilton and Verstappen, I would argue that Sainz has been the third best driver over the past 5 or 6 race weekends. And he has been very consistent in qualifying and in the races, and even notched his first victory, of course, in Silverstone. Lando Norris with that race streak looks very good. And despite the fact that I'm concerned about him maybe qualifying very well and losing positions in the race, I still think is worthwhile in race week 14. And Magnussen, like I said before, it could be him, it could be Latifi, Albon, or Mick Schumacher, but I'd still favour the Hasses, and let's wait and see if they deliver in the practice sessions, and that will give me a bit more confidence going into the deadline and the qualifying on Saturday. Despite this week being probably the best time to own Lewis Hamilton with those 2 streaks coming up, I still think I'd rather go for something like this, or even in the case of Team 2, where you have Ferrari or Red Bull as your constructor, with Red Bull being my preference, and then you're able to go for maybe double Ferrari here to compensate with Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, Lando Norris, and you have that kind of Alpine driver and the budget option in Kevin Magnussen. This is very affordable, by the way. My budget isn't that great. It's 105 million with my main team. I haven't been looking too much into the price rises, playing the wild card and gaining the team value, which is maybe a bit of a mistake, but I don't think you also make too much out of it. It's not like I could go from, for example, Carlos Sainz all the way to George Russell, and even then it's not a huge upgrade. And also the only thing I could really do if I was able to have 110 million, for example, would be going from Magnussen up to an Alpine driver, and even then it would be pushing it quite a bit. So I like this build, although I am a bit skeptical about going for double Ferrari, but if it is going to be rainy conditions throughout the whole weekend, I would rather have Leclerc and Sainz and just hope that they finish the race and that the strategy isn't too bad, rather than go for Sergio Perez. But it is maybe a bit kind of harsh on the Mexican, because he has been very good this year, a definite improvement on the last season, and I still think that maybe he's been a bit hard done by with some of the changes in the Red Bull car, because there's a clear difference from kind of the Monaco Grand Prix when he got his win this season compared to the races preceding that. But this is probably, in my opinion, the best build you can go for, which is quite affordable. But if you want and you kind of have the team structure for it, you already have Verstappen or George Russell, it might be better for your squad and your team situation to go for Lewis Hamilton for this week, rather than going for this balance, which is maybe a bit of a template team, but I still think in the long term it will grind out the results for you and be very successful. Let me know your thoughts in terms of Sergio Perez versus having double Ferrari. Would you rather just still go for the Mexican despite his poor record in the rain? Let's wait and see how the conditions are, of course, but I think we are going to get some kind of turbulent conditions, and it should be great. It should open up the field a little bit. And one thing that's worth noting is that if it does indeed rain, which I've said quite a lot of times in this video, the best drivers in those conditions for me are, not in any order, Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, Fernando Alonso, and I'd maybe put Lando Norris in and amongst them. Sergio Perez is one that I'd be a bit unsure of if the conditions do go on. But if it somehow is dry or there's not too much rain, I think Sergio Perez remains one of the very best options in the game, to be fair. And I like this build overall. There might be one or two changes, and I think the main one would be Sergio Perez in for one of those Ferrari drivers. But thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video or found it useful, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe for new. Let's get this video to over 50 likes, and I'll be updating my YouTube community posts and also on Twitter with my final team selection once the practice sessions are over and we have more information. That's what I like to do. I'm not really a big fan, like I said, of these price rises and chasing them. I'd rather have more information and then build the best team possible based on what we've seen with all the practice sessions. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and you can also check out my playlist for UCL Fantasy and FPL. There's much more content coming your way, especially with the Champions League draw being made on the 25th of August. So there's going to be another first draft video for UCL Fantasy, as well as the kind of usual team selection video, and maybe some more content headed your way in that regard as well. I'm also going to see you for the FPL deadline stream. It's always great to see you on there, and I wish you all the best of luck for Raceweek 14. I hope you enjoyed your break and continue to do very well in this F1 Fantasy season. You can also become a patron or a channel member. Consider clicking the links in the description below, and I just wish you all the very best. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.